Welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show, special edition. We're late at night broadcasting live from Belle Chase, Louisiana, just outside of New Orleans. And normally we're on WSHO 800 AM here in New Orleans on Saturday mornings. But of course, we've had a little bit of a hiccup with that plan over the last several weeks. And from hurricanes and power outages, we got the power here, so I wanted to give you a little bit of an update and talk about some other things that are on my mind going on in the world right now. And so we're streaming live right now on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and we're also on Periscope via Twitter. So if you just basically punch in anything on any of those platforms, the Rock Worldwide Show or at Kingdom Useful, you should be able to find us live there. Also, we'll be checking out in the chat room. Feel free to ask questions, make comments within the chat room. That'll be monitored as well. So by now, everybody's heard Hurricane Ida came in, and it was everything that they said it was going to be. In fact, I know on Thursday, personally, I was a little bit nervous. I had ordered a bunch of food, figured we'd just ride it out based on the way that the storm was projected to go, which for where we live in kind of a suburb of the city of New Orleans, going further west is better for us. If the storm passes closer to the mouth of the Mississippi River to the west, it's not a good thing for us. So we tried to make sure, it was like that thing could take a little bit of a dodge, a little bit of a jog back to the east. And if it did, it would be kind of a worst case scenario. Fortunately, since Hurricane Katrina, there has been billions of dollars of federal levee protection and flood wall protection built. I happen to find myself fortunate enough to live inside of that flood protection. So this wasn't really a storm like Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago to the date when Hurricane Ida came on shore. This wasn't really going to be something that I was concerned with in terms of flooding, but if this thing, grew pretty rapidly, got to be a big storm, category 3 or bigger, and then if it just took a little bit of a jog to the east, I felt like this was going to be bad. So I was hoping to try to get out, convince my wife to try to get out. We had family members that were sticking around, so we didn't really feel comfortable leaving. And so we decided we were going to ride it out. And of course, just like everybody else, there was almost 100% power. I mean, the storm was just horrible for some of the parishes just to the west of us, parishes like Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish, St. John, St. James, a little bit of Lower Jefferson Parish, like especially the Grand Isle area. I mean, for some of these places, by now you've probably seen some of the pictures, but I mean, it really looks like a bomb went off. And some of it looks all too familiar because the memories of Hurricane Katrina are still quite vivid. Now, you'll see on the screen, it says that we are live at WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. That's not true. It's just the graphic that we have, but we are streaming live at Kingdom Useful anywhere on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter via Periscope. So, and again, there you can make your comments and stuff. I just wanted to come on because it had been a couple of weeks since I was able to do a show live on Saturday mornings on WSHO. And so figured we'd come out here and stream, just put some content out there, go live tonight. Had a couple things on my mind. Just to let you know, we personally got our power back at our house. We personally got that back a couple days ago, a little over 24 hours ago, actually. And we were fortunate enough we didn't have any real damage. We lost one of our little trees, but it looks like everything, all the shingles, everything on the house, no water damage, no wind damage. Looks like we were very fortunate. A lot of people not so. What you see, it's weird from storms in the past compared to this one. This was by far the most intense storm that I ever tried to ride out. Watching the winds and the rains literally go sideways. Watching the wind gusts. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, there was like 8 hours throughout the late afternoon into the evening, into the early morning hours. There were some really intense moments, some really just constantly sounded like howling, around and about the house that we were sheltered in place at. So it was pretty intense, make no doubt about it. We have family members that had some minor roof damage, nothing that insurance, really shouldn't take care of. But all of your prayers from all over the world have been so helpful throughout all of this. As the storm passed and it was doing its deal up in the Northeast, there were actually, like, I think at one point there were more people that had died in the Northeast and the effects of Ida. There were places in like New Jersey and Philadelphia and New York. There were places that got more rain at a particular period of time, like in a 12-hour period of time, than what had been done as it was a Category 4 hurricane and as it came across. It's so weird how these tropical storms, how they work. And, a lot of people look to the devastation of you see the pictures of water rushing into subways and flooding happened. I think 40 last count as of this broadcast was like 41 people had died up in New Jersey and that in the Northeast area from Hurricane Ida, the remnants of Hurricane Ida. Yet here in Louisiana, at the same time that they were counting a body count of like 41 people dead, the same thing was happening here. And the count was like 2. Now, since then, there have been some people that have died. Some have died from like carbon monoxide poisoning. Some died because they were evacuated to some not so great places. But for the most part, it's sort of amazing when you think about the magnitude of a storm like this and the lack of death. And I'm not trying to talk down the lack of death as some saving statistic, but I do want us to kind of consider that although a storm like this took place, there were people who did not die en masse. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, because you're going to hear people, and I know I've heard from people that I have been evacuated around, people close to me. I've heard this sort of trend being discussed. I've heard it in news broadcasts. Over the last, say, 15 or 16 years since Hurricane Katrina, there have been several storms here in Louisiana that we can name and think of. Things like Gustav and Rita. Just last year, there were like 4 named hurricanes that hit Louisiana just last year. Delta, Laura, Zeta, and I forget the other one that hit. But I think it's Crystal Bell. Those 4 storms, coupled with the storm that we had earlier this year, coupled with Ida that just passed, there's a depression in the Gulf right now. And people see these storms happening over and over in a period of time where it's very vivid in our memories. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, like you talked about storms like Betsy and Camille. These were storms from like 1965. These were storms from the 1960s and the 1970s. And those were like the major 2 storms that anybody really talked about, at least around here in the New Orleans area. Since that time, though, what's interesting is that since that time, there have been multiple storms, and people want to begin to try to point to radical environmental needs. The fact that there's climate change that are causing these more intense storms. There was a period of time after Hurricane Katrina where it was almost a decade that a major named storm, a major storm is like a Category 3 or greater, had hit the continental United States. There was like a period of like, thankfully, after Hurricane Katrina, there were still storms, but they were small storms. They were tropical storms. They were Category 1, Category 2s, nothing that got at least to a Category 3 when it came on land in the continental United States. So these sorts of statistics, they don't really get thrown out about. In fact, let me bring up something here I want to share with you. Let's see if I can do this on the broadcast here. There is a piece, a story, if you will. I want to share a screen, and the screen that I want to share is this one. Yes, I'm going to share that one. And all right, so this is a story from the Wall Street Journal, and so hopefully you can actually see this a little bit a little bit better. But while we're on the subject of hurricanes, this is part of the story that really isn't getting talked about very much. I'm reading a book currently right now from the former founder of Greenpeace, and he's basically debunking all of the radical environmental narratives. And this article actually does the same thing. But what you see in this particular article in the Wall Street Journal, this is an opinion by Bjorn Lomborg. Death rates, first of all, the number of landfall hurricanes isn't rising, and the world is getting better at mitigating their destruction. If you look at this particular graph here that I'm taking a look at, you see that this trend line is actually heading downward. The trend line, which is more or less like your average storms, is actually heading down. And I'll just go ahead and read you a little bit about this article so you get kind of a flavor for what this article is saying. Hurricane season has arrived in the Atlantic Ocean. Already this summer, Hurricanes Henri and Ida have caused headline-generating damage and flooding in the Gulf states, the Southeast, and the Middle Atlantic states. Yet despite what you have heard or may have heard, Atlantic hurricanes are not becoming more frequent. In fact, the frequency of hurricanes making landfall in the continental U.S. has declined slightly since 1990. Airplanes and satellites have dramatically increased the number of storms that scientists can spot at sea today, making the frequency of landfall hurricanes, which were reliably documented even in the 1900s, a better statistic than the total number of Atlantic hurricanes. And look at what it says. They aren't more powerful hurricanes either. The frequency category 3 and above hurricanes making landfall since 1900 is also trending slightly down. A July Nature paper finds that the increase in strong hurricanes you've heard so much about are, quote, not a part of the century scale increase, but a recovery from a deep minimum in the 1960s and through the 1980s, close quote. And it goes on to talk about how we see the images of the devastation. It's heartbreaking. We see the people living along the United States coastline. They're vulnerable. And here's the thing. People living on the coastlines have dramatically risen, which of course is then going to make more people vulnerable. But many more people now live in the path of these destructive storms than they did even just a few decades ago. But because of better infrastructure, fed by improved technology and wealth, all of this does more to protect lives and property. This does more to protecting lives and protecting property than cutting carbon emissions. Today, hurricanes around the world cause damage worth 0.04% of global gross domestic product. And even accounting for the recent estimate by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UNIPCC, that proportion of strong hurricanes will increase. The destruction dealt by these storms is still projected by a study in Nature to drop to 0.02% of global GDP in 2100. So in literally 80 years from now, the prediction is that the cost of all the damage by major hurricanes is actually going to be far less of global GDP than even still today. It's going to be cut in half. And eliminating climate change would only slightly speed up that decrease to hit 0.01% in 2100. The number of hurricanes hitting American soil has gone down, even strong ones. And with or without emission cuts, the world is becoming more resilient to these particular hurricanes. Now, this is absolutely the case. This is absolutely the case without a shadow of a doubt. This is what is happening to our planet right now. But it is unfortunately, it is not what you're hearing in the media. Unfortunately, this doesn't fit the narrative. Okay, this doesn't fit the global climate change alarmism that really wants to try to control everything in our lives at all times. And that's why you don't hear about these particular stories. Now, I had been reading a book, and this book is really a book that if you can go pick it up, it's super important. Okay, I want to share with you again my screen here. Let's see here. What if I go to a different screen, like here? There we go. This particular book is called 10 Global Trends That Every Smart Person Should Know. You have to pick it up. If you're in these if you're in these areas, if you will, where you argue on social media or in a public sector or anything, you've got to pick up this book. It's been out for a while, but this is trend number 10 that you're looking at on the screen right now of the top 10 human trends today that every smart person should know. And this is globally. And so I'll just read a little bit of this to you. Trend number 10 is that our world is safer than it's ever been. The chance of a person dying in a natural catastrophe, earthquake, flood, drought, storm, wildfire, landslide, or epidemic has declined by nearly 99% since the 1920s and 30s. That's almost 100% decline since basically over the last 100 years. So if we take the last 100 years, then what you're seeing is a almost 100% decline. People today are much more likely to survive natural disasters because of increased wealth and technological progress. Buildings are better constructed to survive earthquakes. Weather satellites are better constructed weather satellites and sophisticated computer models provide early storm warnings that give people time to prepare and evacuate. And broad disease surveillance enables swift medical intervention to halt developing epidemics. Unfortunately, bad weather and earthquakes produce death and destruction largely when they encounter poverty. Now let that sink in for a moment. The key when we see natural disasters and we see a high rate of deaths as a result of those natural disasters, the key component there is that what the natural disasters come in contact with is global poverty. Global poverty is what has taken a major natural disasters have come in contact with poverty, and there are huge, destructive, high death counts as a result of those two things coming in together. Consequently, 90% of deaths from natural disasters occur in developing and poor countries between 1996 and 2015. The largest natural disasters in the past 20 years were the Indian Ocean tsunami that resulted in the deaths of 230,000 people in 2004, and 2010, the Haitian earthquake in which 223,000 people died. It was a cyclone Nargis. It was a Category 4 storm that killed 138,000 people in Myanmar in 2008. In contrast, when Queensland, Australia, was hit by the Category 5 cyclone Yashi in 2010, the result was 0 fatalities. The cost of weather-related catastrophes like hurricanes have increased, largely because rising incomes have prompted people to put more property in harm's way as they build more houses, roads, schools, factories, and shopping centers. Nevertheless, the University of Chicago political scientist Roger Pelkey Jr., sorry if I said your name wrong, Dr. Pelkey, found that the global trend in weather-related disaster losses between 1990 and 2017 as a proportion of global gross domestic product is downward. globally speaking, people are generally getting richer faster than nature can destroy their property. And if you want to see there's the on the screen, there's the source. It's the Center for Research on Epidemiology of Disasters, Emergency Event Database website, 2019. Okay, so this is well funded. This is well cited. These are not things. These are almost indisputable type of facts. I see we have some comments. I want to go ahead and put those up. Let's see here. Yukio, take tincture of dandelion. It may slow the progress of spike proteins, but the evidence on these quasi-vaccines is those who took the graphene-rich vaccines are not long for this world. I don't agree, Yoko. There's no evidence of that. What we do know now is that they're effective. We'll get to those in a second. We're talking about climate change and everything like that, so we'll get to that in a second. Also, Yoko, you put this up, that the depopulation of the world, depopulation should be the highest priority for the United States foreign policy toward the third world. That has been debunked. If you just simply look that up, that's something that isn't true. And then Yoko finally said, weather balloons exist. Satellites are an Arthur Clarke fantasy. Thank you for being a flat earther there, Yoko. Okay. So that's primarily the biggest thing that you're not going to hear from the mainstream media about these storms. And especially from weather people, you're going to hear that these storms are getting worse. But if you try to kind of recap, since we kind of diverged from the conversation there for a moment, the storms are hitting and creating massive destruction because of several key concepts. As people get wealthier, as people build closer to the shoreline, as people build and put their wealth into real estate, into places where hurricanes are going to hit directly, you're going to see greater devastation. But you're not seeing, when the storms hit those same places, you're seeing the property devastation, which still is globally trending downward, but you don't see the depths because of what technology is doing for us. Because we're able to see these storms earlier, we're able to track these storms earlier, we're able to have computers and the models from the computers be able to predict the path so we can get out of Dodge as needed. This is one of those storms where there was no way that you could have ordered in enough time a mandatory evacuation, because it was just too unknown. That just wasn't amount of time. So I don't have a lot of criticism for the way that the leaders here locally have handled it. So far, it seems like they've handled it pretty well. The biggest hiccup so far, if you've heard about it or not, was this the evacuation rather of like 7 different nursing homes. They put people in warehouses, and unfortunately, I believe last count 4 people lost their lives as the conditions in those warehouse situations degraded all too rapidly, and the people who were there, they didn't really do anything to try and get help fast enough for these people. And so unfortunately, some people lost their lives. So I guess it's directly related to the storm itself. But that being said, pick up the book when you can. 10 let's see, what was the name of the book again? Let's see here if I can pull the banner up here. 10 Global Trends That Every Smart Person Should Know. So it's a great book. It'll give you great ammunition when you make your arguments. There's some trends in there that I promise you will absolutely shock you, because they are evidentiary counter knowledge to what you hear on a regular basis, the narrative being fed to us through the corporate media and through politicians and political parties. Speaking of politicians and political parties, I guess now would be the time. Let's go ahead and get into our COVID. Let's go ahead and get into all of our COVID stuff here. If we bring up this article, this is kind of interesting. Okay, and I don't know if this will get me booted off of. I don't know if this will get me booted off of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter for posting this, But I just want to share this with you because this comes from studyfinds.org, and I will post this. I've seen this in multiple locations. I will stick it in the comments section of all of the broadcasts that we are doing right now, so that you can have access to that wherever you possibly might be reading or watching this particular broadcast. The study basically that recently came out shows that the cloth masks filter out just about 10% of the exhaled aerosols, with many people not wearing coverings that fit their face properly. So this is something that we've known all along, that if you're not wearing an N95 mask, it also says a KN95 mask. I don't know anything about the KN95s. I do know that from the beginning, the size of the coronavirus is only going to be filtered by an N95 mask. This is the medical standard for trying to filter out whatever's in the air, trying to keep that out of you. Now, I've done this before, but I'll do it again, and I'll keep doing it because I keep seeing a lack of understanding on this particular issue. When you go in for surgery, you're typically laying on the table, and everyone in there that is standing over you performing the surgery is wearing a surgical mask. Now, that surgical mask is primarily to keep liquid from when you speak. A surgeon will be asking a nurse for something, a scalpel, suction, clamp. There's talking. Everybody that talks, you get a little spittle that comes out. But if you have the cloth mask on, whatever's in that spittle hopefully gets caught in the surgical mask. Now, clearly, if you're just breathing, it has to be enough for the breath for the surgeon, like surgeons who do 8, 10, 12-hour surgeries, that clearly they have to have enough ability to breathe through the mask that air can travel through. Okay. But we're talking about droplets that if you are infected with the coronavirus, and then let's just recap this real quick. Coronavirus and COVID-19 are not the same thing. Coronavirus is the virus that if you get it, it will eventually develop into SARS-CoV-2, will eventually turn into coronavirus disease 2019. The disease is the thing that we are trying to prevent from taking place. But the coronavirus itself, you can be infected by the coronavirus and be asymptomatic. Never develop COVID, never show a symptom of COVID-19. If you're infected with the coronavirus, you can develop COVID. Your version of COVID could be severe. It could be mild. If you have comorbidities, it could become too severe that you would need hospitalization, possibly intubation. And this is where we see many people who have gone into the hospital that have eventually died as a result of either with or of COVID-19. I think the last time I saw on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple of weeks ago, they brought up a graph from the CDC, and the CDC said that there were only 5% of people who are dying strictly from COVID-19. Okay, so that means 95% of people are dying with COVID-19, and they average 4.5 comorbidities. Okay, so things like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, things like that. The 95% of people, one of the best things that you can do to help you during this time of the pandemic, if you're obese, is to lose weight, is to get yourself more cardiovascularly healthy, to have better heart health, better nutrition, take vitamins. General health is going to help you, especially if you're younger. If you're under the age of 50 and you have relatively no comorbidities, your survival rate is almost guaranteed whether you get COVID or not. And we already know, before we even get into the vaccines, we already know that natural immunity for someone who's had COVID is far better in terms of having antibodies than if you have the vaccine. Vaccines are not yet able to create enough antibodies to keep up with natural immunity if you've had COVID. Now, that doesn't mean you want to run out and have COVID. COVID is a serious thing. But this particular article here that we're taking a look at shows you very, very quickly. The researchers from the University of Waterloo simulated a person breathing in a large room with a cloth face mask on. And despite wearing the mask, the study finds a large buildup of aerosol droplets suspended in the air. Okay, so we know that the surgical masks, only filter out about 10% of the exhaled aerosols. A cloth mask, like a neck gaiter or some kind of just branded, if you will, cloth, just a cloth mask, it just doesn't do anything. Okay, so I think one of the things, if we're clear about this, what we're trying to do with the mask, and listen, by the way, two things can be true at the same time. What I'm telling you about the mask based on the most recent studies is true. But at the same time, what I'm trying to tell you is that the mask also can be helpful. Okay. But the mandates, they're not very effective. They can be helpful. And I don't think mandates should be the way to go. Okay. If you've been vaccinated or you've had COVID and you have natural immunity, that's basically should be enough to protect you from those who have not been vaccinated and have not yet gotten COVID-19. For the most part, just like the flu, we're all going to eventually get COVID-19. Some version of the coronavirus, whether it's the Alpha or this current most recent Delta, or as Dr. Fauci is trying to warn people of, this new Mu variant of the coronavirus. And there's going to be a ton more variations and mutations of coronavirus. The majority of them, when they mutate, they're going to mutate into something that doesn't really get spread very quickly. It doesn't have the same viral effect, to use kind of like an online term. Its virulence isn't as strong. This Delta, this Delta version absolutely was more virulent, but it seemed to be a lesser severity of COVID. And what you really did see was a very high hospitalization rate of people who primarily were unvaccinated. I personally am vaccinated. I've had both of the Moderna jabs. I haven't gone back for the third Moderna jab yet for the booster. But time will tell. We'll see what happens. So I'm not telling you should go get the vaccine. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't go get the vaccine. I still believe this is America, and if you don't want to go get it, don't go get it. But at the same time, understand you're potentially putting yourself there at risk based on what the data shows right now. Well, now let me transition now into the vaccine, and let me try to tell you what the vaccine is and isn't doing. This technology, the mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, these new types of vaccines, people are like, no, you shouldn't even call it a vaccine because there's no dormant part of the virus that's being shot into the bodies of humans, and so it shouldn't even be called a vaccine. Okay, that's really like a poor argument. Okay, a vaccine, and in the case of the two new ones, the two mRNAs, not the Johnson & Johnson, but the mRNA vaccines still do what the old vaccines do, but they don't require you to put a dormant. They don't have to actually infect you in order for you to build up some immunity. So what I mean by that is that mRNA, if you don't know, is the part of it's the replicating RNA. It's a reader, if you will. And so what we're putting into when you get the mRNA vaccine, they're putting instructions for the ribosomes inside the cell to read the instructions and to disperse the information to the necessary parts of the immune system. It does not go into the nucleus of the cell where DNA is. So myth number one, it's not affecting your DNA. The study that came out from the Harvard professor or the former Harvard graduate or whatever turned out to be a completely bunk story. There is no lingering mRNA information. In fact, after just a few days, that's why you have to wait a few a few weeks before you can go get tested to see if you have the antibodies from the vaccines, because it destroys it, but it protects it long enough. We coat it with a particular protective coating so that it can get into the cell, the information can get read, and it can tell the immune system to create the spike protein that ultimately will help you to understand your immune system, to understand that, hey, when we see something like this, immediately go and get it. So what the vaccine is not doing is the vaccine is not designed to try and protect you from getting infected with coronavirus. It is also not protecting you from transmitting coronavirus. That is not the purpose of the vaccines. It is also not the purpose of the virus to prevent developing COVID-19. So if you get infected with coronavirus and you are vaccinated, that should kind of be normal. There are people who get flu vaccines, and during flu season, they get infected with the flu. The vaccine is designed to hopefully prevent coronavirus from replicating so much in the body that before the body immune system knows what hit it and you develop a severe case of COVID, it attacks it right at the point of infection. And if you develop, which some will, some won't, if you develop COVID-19 even after vaccination, it will make it less severe. You won't need hospitalization, and ultimately you won't die. That's the purpose of the vaccine. Let's not get it twisted. These terms, I've had to break these terms down almost every week on our show here. And I hope you're finally starting to understand what we're trying to say as it pertains to these particular vaccines. We have to remember what COVID is doing and what COVID is not doing. Just because you hear about breakthrough cases, listen, if you're hearing about breakthrough cases, that's good. That means that people are being vaccinated. Okay. If you hear, like right now, they want to just talk about how Florida's got so many death rates and such high death rate, highest it's ever had in its state. They want to talk about how the red states and how they're not making these mandates. They want to lift up Gavin Newsom in California. They're doing this because it serves a purpose. It serves a narrative. The masks are performance. If it makes you feel better to wear a mask and you think that you're doing something good for others, or you think it's good for others to help you by putting on a mask, then do it, okay? But what I'm telling you is the studies say that it's 90% ineffective, okay? So you get some benefit there, but it's the same kind of benefit that you would get if you were a surgeon and you were doing surgery inside of a person's body, okay? It's only going to keep large aerosol droplets from getting outside, but the small ones that really come through just the warmth and the moisture of your breath and through your nose, it's getting through, okay? It's getting through, and we know that it has viral load in it. And if it has viral load in it, it's going to linger in the air. And if you're standing there talking to someone not 6 to 12 feet apart and you just linger between the two, it's going to be infected. Now, remember, COVID-19 is on par in terms of its infection rate with chickenpox. Now, we know in a school when a kid tests or when a kid starts showing symptoms of chickenpox, everybody goes on lockdown because the average person, when they get chickenpox, infects 4 other people. And chickenpox usually affect children. Okay. So COVID-19, especially this Delta variant, has like a 4 to 4.5% infection rate as everybody else has. All right. I want to talk about one last thing, and then we'll be out of here. Okay. I saw and kind of what made me talk about this last subject about what COVID is doing and what COVID isn't doing is because I saw a headline on Revolver News. Results are in. 0 evidence masks, lockdown, or vaccines prevent outbreaks. Well, yeah, that's true. Okay. That is very true. That's a very true statement, but it's misleading. Now, this comes from a very conservative website. So I'm trying to point this out to you because you have to see what this headline is saying. And you also have to see what this headline is not saying, but it's sort of implying it, which then makes it a little bit shady. Again, results are in. Zero evidence that masks, lockdowns, or vaccines prevent outbreaks. I just got finished telling you the vaccines are not there to prevent outbreaks. The vaccines are there to prevent severe COVID-19 per the individual who is vaccinated. Yes, the lockdowns don't really help. Okay. And the reason that the lockdowns don't really help is because people are still around each other. People are going to go out. Australia's had the most Orwellian. If you've kept up with what's been happening in Australia, it's a shame. People are being arrested for coming outside their houses, and the side effects of a lockdown, the decline in mental health, the child abuse that is up because kids are not going back to schools and they're annoying their guardians. Domestic abuse is up because people are having to be with each other all the time now. Suicides are up. Teenagers are just that they're having just hard, they're not able to be social. They're feeling isolated from their friends and disconnected. And then of course social media doesn't help because it exacerbates all of those negative symptoms. And finally, we've already talked about the mask. So yes, those things don't prevent outbreaks, but those things do necessarily prevent sometimes infections. Those things do sometimes prevent some of the spread, and those things do prevent death. That is what we're trying to mitigate here. The same thing with the storms. We're trying to mitigate death. We're trying to prevent death. And death is happening at a lesser rate for natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, and the like. Deaths are what we're trying to prevent with the vaccines. So if you want to prevent death, the evidence is in. They're safe. Almost 400 million Americans have received some dose of the vaccine. We're not seeing what conspiracy theorists think that they're seeing. You cannot go to the CDC VAERS website, and that's an open source website that anybody can go there and say whatever they want. The CDC has to investigate every single one of those cases. So don't go there if you're not 100% sure that something negative has happened as a result of a vaccine. And of course, lastly, I kind of wanted to illuminate. This is from National Review. I'll go ahead and throw that up on the page right now as well as we kind of close out here. This is from National Review, and it's a shame that this pandemic in the United States, it's really a shame how politicized this whole pandemic and the public policies that go along with it have become. If you think back to 2020, before the election, and we've talked about this a little bit, President Trump was out there saying, hey, they're giving me hydroxychloroquine that may be effective. I'm taking a cocktail of drugs. I'm getting antibody transfusions when he contracted COVID-19 himself. He said, Operation Warp Speed, we're going to get vaccines to the people. All of these things have already taken place. And the vaccine companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, they had the vaccines available, and they withheld from the American people going into the election that the vaccines had been manufactured, and they were receiving emergency approval from the FDA because that would have severely helped President Trump. But what we played on this show a couple of weeks ago, so if you go back and look at the shows a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we played was Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, among others within the AOC, all of them were poo-pooing Trump's vaccine. Who'd want to take it? They cast severe doubt. They said that these things were going to be unsafe. They said that these things were not going to be received well from the American people. Who's going to want to go take the vaccine? No one's going to sign up. So they poo-pooed the idea because it was Trump. It was orange man bad. And then, of course, the election comes, and conservatives forget who made the vaccines possible. It was under the Trump administration. I believe if Trump gets elected, and remember, by the time Biden takes the oath of office to be president of the United States, we were already vaccinating or giving 1 million doses a day across the United States of America by the time Biden gets sworn into office. That was under the Trump administration. So the fact that that was already happening, then conservatives all of a sudden got like super nervous about taking the vaccine because the Democrats are the one who are now administering it. Now, listen, I'll admit, and this should be well noted, that because the same people that I just mentioned, because they flipped and went to vaccines that all of a sudden they went from, hey, it's not safe and you can't trust it, to look at me, I got jabbed and it's safe to. And I know that you don't trust Democrats. I know that you don't trust the Democrat Party and their politicians, progressives, liberals, leftists. I get it. Neither do I. But if this would have been the Trump administration, and this would have been conservatives spearheading and leading and encouraging, I think more of you would be okay with the vaccine. Do not let one thing unrelated to the vaccine prevent you from getting it if it could potentially prevent you from dying somewhere in the future. And what I simply mean by that is your trust or your lack of trust in liberal, progressive, leftist policies and Democrat leaders, your lack of trust in them is noted, is understood. But understand who made this possible. And if it was on a different foot, if this was Trump's second term and we're 8, 9, 10 months into his next, his second term, things would have been a little bit different, I believe. Okay. And this kind of shows you, I'm going to go back to that article right here. And this again is from National Review. The bitter truth, there's still no rhyme or reason to COVID-19. The stats defy the spin. This pandemic does not hinge on whether the governor is a Democrat or a Republican, whether restrictions are tight or whether they are loose. It does not care. 2 presidents, 50 states, 195 countries, a multitude of different approaches, and still there's no rhyme or reason to this pandemic. Vaccines are a great help. That much we know. Beyond that, though, the coverage of the virus has mostly been partisanship and witchcraft. Here, current as of today, in this article, just so that you know, and I'll put this in the comment section, this was as of August the 30th. Okay, I'll copy this. I'm going to drop it into the show notes right now. If you're watching this on Twitter, these things are not showing up, but I'll manually go and put those things into the show notes because they're not showing up on Periscope or on Twitter right now. But if you're on YouTube or if you're watching this by way of Facebook, you can see this article there as well. But look at this. Look at this stat here. As of today, August 30th, the per state death chart per 100,000 people in the United States. Okay, let's take a look at these high rates. So you have, they colored it, okay, based on the number of deaths. Okay, let me see if I can grab this thing and put it right smack here in the middle. Cool. So here we see that New Jersey is the worst. Okay, New Jersey 302 and New York 279. Okay, yet down here, Hawaii, 42. Could that be because people are outside a lot in Hawaii? Could that be that Hawaii is a little more rural, a little more open air, a little better weather? I don't know. Here you have Vermont and Alaska. Could it be because people are spread out here? Because Alaska is so spread out like that? I don't know. Here in the middle, okay, you kind of look at these red states, and these red states that have basically adopted a lot of the similar Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa, South Carolina, Florida. They've all sort of adopted a similar way of doing things. And their numbers are right at about the same, ranging as high as, let's see here, Florida 205, all the way down to Tennessee 195. Okay, but up here at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if we look at the top 10 worst COVID death rate per 100,000, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 5 blue states, 5 red states. And this trend sort of continues itself. So which policy is the best? I mean, it looks like the one Hawaii did if we're just simply looking at death, but these things are not quite that simple. Okay, it's not. I wish it was as simple as just looking at what they do, and it's confusing, right? So try as you may, you're not going to find a plausible way of blaming this on that party or region or policy that you hate. Okay, again, don't let one thing that is true be true and affect your thinking. And this is why people are prone to conspiracy theories, because you don't trust certain, you don't trust certain parties, you don't trust certain politicians, and then you tag them in their state, and then you say, oh, that's why their state's not doing good, and we got a Republican governor, so that's why our state's doing better. Well, that's not what the data shows. Okay, that's an uninformed opinion. The New York Times a couple of days ago, from the time that this article was written, wrote an excellent piece on the terrible spike in Florida. And it even a state that made a major push for vaccinations can be crushed by the Delta variant, the paper observed. While noting that Florida ranks 21st among states and Washington, D.C. in giving people of all ages at least one shot. Indeed, the Times noted nobody is quite sure why this is happening. Exactly why the state has been so hard hit remains an elusive question. Because other states with comparable vaccine coverage have a small fraction of Florida's hospitalization rate. Okay, and so this article goes on to say that, like, we don't know. There's still no formula yet. I mean, just take, for instance, as we kind of close up here for this episode of the show, take for instance what happened with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan caught all kinds of heck because he was taking a Z-Pack and he did some antibody transfusions. And he did ivermectin, the deworming medicine, and he threw everything at it. He threw a cocktail of things. But if you know anything about Joe Rogan, he exercises regularly. He's not overweight. Yes, he's 54 years old, so he's a little bit up in age in terms of when the numbers start to shift a little bit in COVID-19. But from the day he tested positive, 2 days later, he tested negative. So he beat COVID in 2 days. He threw everything at it. If it was healthy enough for him to take, and there was a possibility, now remember, I'm pretty sure he was vaccinated. Okay, I'm pretty sure he was vaccinated. But even after he was vaccinated, the vaccination alone could have been the thing that caused him to be such a mild case of COVID-19, or to test negative for COVID-19 so quick. But now he's got antibodies. He's had the vaccine. He's got the antibodies. And for the period of time when he was positive, he threw everything at it, whether it was experimental, whether it was proven to work, whether it was not proven to work. The opposite is true. I know people personally who have not been vaccinated, have multiple comorbidities, are not healthy, have tried ivermectin. It hasn't worked. In fact, they've had prolonged long COVID. The effects of it have been lingering. And I know that there are folks who have had to be hospitalized because they don't trust the vaccine. They don't trust what our public health officials are telling us. They have a certain faith confession. And in doing so, they are very suspicious of the medical community. And as a result, we're in prayer right now, praying. I don't want to say the person's name for privacy's sake, but if you're out there watching this and you take a moment, you hear this, just pray for the person that Trey is thinking about at this very moment, because A miracle is definitely needed for this person. It does not look like this person. There's a strong possibility this person might not make it out of the hospital as a result of his battle with COVID-19. So you have those ranges, and more information is coming out, but you got to know where to get good information. That is such an important thing. Well, I want to go ahead and wrap up the show on that note. And I hope that all of you are staying healthy. I hope you and your family are well. Thank you for all your prayers and thoughts and just continue to pray for the people. There are a lot of people that have lost their homes. There are a lot of people who have lost their businesses, have lost their boats. They are going to be, it's going to take a very long, give you an example. On the island of Grand Isle, it's 100% of the buildings have been damaged by Hurricane Ida. There is a 3-foot coat of sand across the entire island of Grand Isle. I know people down there. I know people who have family down there. They absolutely are some of the most resilient people that you're going to find on planet Earth. They will rebuild, and they will probably get hit by another storm within the next 10 years. It's just a part of living down there. They love living on the land. They love living near the Gulf of Mexico. But when you do that, you run the risk of what's happened in the case of Hurricane Ida. So please continue to pray for the people down there, the people in Houma, Terrebonne Parish, Lafourche Parish, Lower Plaquemines Parish, Lower Jefferson Parish, and even some of the places on the North Shore. This storm did a lot of damage. If you kind of look at the track, it did this weird. It wasn't just a straight in and then off to the east. It snaked around in the state of Louisiana, and it hit people. The eye wall hit people. They got a double dose. People who weren't expected to get a double dose of that eye wall, and who knows? Eventually, they may actually bump this one up to a Category 5, because there are people who claim that there were 180-mile-an-hour sustained winds when Ida came aboard, and she stayed a Category 4. She didn't downgrade very quick because the land that she went over was still very marshy. There was a lot of bays. There was a lot of lakes that it went over, so it really stayed over warm water even as it moved on land. So a lot of people are hurting. People in Crown Point and Lower Jean Lafitte, just a lot of people. So continue to pray. If you find it within yourself, give to the Red Cross, find Samaritan's Purse, reach out. You can also go to whitedove.org on that website and give, and just put in the notes that you want to give to hurricane recovery. Anything you can do as you listen to this would be helpful and be much appreciated. So just want to remind you to oppose progressivism wherever it rears its ugly head, and do so by illuminating the light of truth. We'll see you next time here on the Rock Worldwide Show. Trey Roberts. See you next time.